First and foremost, I'm Reza Marashi, you know who I am. More importantly, however, sitting to my right, Sanam Anderlini is one of the world's most respected experts on gender and security. She currently serves as the Senior Gender, Peace, and Security Advisor on the UN's Mediation Standby Team. She is also the co-founder of the International Civil Society Action Network, a US-based NGO dedicated to supporting civil society activism in peace and security in conflict-affected countries. So very simple stuff, as you can imagine. Sitting to my left, on the far left, Suzanne DiMaggio is a director and senior fellow at the New America Foundation, where she focuses on the organization's international security projects related to the Middle East and Asia, and directs the US-Iran initiative. The project's centerpiece is a long-running Track 2 dialogue that she established in 2002. Let me repeat that again. In 2002, before the idea of talking to Iran was cool, she was doing it, which brings together influential and knowledgeable Americans and Iranians to explore possible grounds of engagement. And last but certainly not least, Farideh Farhi is an affiliate graduate faculty and lecturer at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Farhi has also taught comparative politics at the University of Colorado, Tehran University, and Shahid Beheshti University in Tehran. In the 1990s, she worked in Iran, where she was a research associate and English editor of the Iranian Journal of International Studies, published by the Institute of Political and International Studies. And if I could add my own 2 cents, she's the Michael Jordan of Iran analysts in the United States. So ladies and gentlemen, give your panel a round of applause. Now, since I am the moderator, I have the prerogative of starting off by asking a few questions. And the first thing that I wanted to ask deals directly with the title of the panel that we have today, this idea of more Obama or back to Bush. And I think that's a poignant question, but I also think it could be basic if we don't flesh it out. It's important to flesh out what are the similarities and the differences between the two approaches. So I thought we could start by just going down the line and all three of you sharing with the group what you think those key similarities and differences are between the two approaches that we've seen from President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. Suzanne, we'll start with you.
Well, first let me just say thank you to NIAC for inviting me. I'm honored to be here, and I sat in on a couple of sessions this morning. I'm so impressed with the work that you are doing to advance the U.S. political system in the right direction. Let me just leave it at that. And in answer to this question, I think, you know, let me start with, and I'm here in my personal capacity, by the way.
Of course.
Let me just start with candidate Trump. I think with him, I'll keep it very short. I think you'll neither get more of Bush or back to Obama. I think we're going to get something dangerous and something that we wouldn't want to see happen. I mean, just judging by what he said the other day, that he would shoot Iranian sailors out of the water if they give American sailors the middle finger. Is that the type of person we want in office? I say no, so I'll just leave it at that. I think we'd get something totally brand new, something erratic, something we haven't seen before. In the case of candidate Secretary Clinton, you know, I think it would probably be somewhere in between, maybe leaning towards more Obama. This campaign process itself has been very interesting, I think. And I think as a candidate, I've been impressed that she's demonstrated a bit of learning along the way, which in political life doesn't happen so often in this town, from what I observed. I think as a result of President Obama's popularity, it was mentioned earlier this morning that his polling numbers, his favorability numbers, are as high as they've ever been. And I think maybe going in as a candidate, she didn't anticipate that she would be riding on his coattails, particularly in foreign policy, as much as she is now. So as a result, as the process of the campaign has gone forward, what we've seen is early on, she's really simply just emphasized that enforcing this deal is what's important to her, and making sure when the Iranians don't follow the deal or do something else that's wrong, that we act on it. And of course, that's true. But lately, if you've noticed, she's changed her tone a little bit. where she's actually spoken more favorably about the less contentious relationship with Iran, how that's a plus. And even a couple of weeks ago, after North Korea did its fifth nuclear test, she even said that she would look to the Iran negotiations as a model for engaging North Korea. So her tone has changed dramatically. And I do think as this campaign goes into the home stretch, she'll be forced to look at the Iran deal in more favorable terms while taking credit for it as well. So I think with Secretary Clinton, we'd get a bit more of Obama than Bush. She is known to have a little bit more hawkish tendencies, but I do think another thing she will probably grab hold to that President Obama has set in motion is a sort of rebalancing of the Middle East, where President Obama now has, in no uncertain terms, has said to the Saudis, for example, you need to share the neighborhood with Iran. And I think that effort at rebalancing the region and getting both Iran and Saudis to some accommodation will be something she will try to continue as well. So I do see quite a bit of continuity.
That's fantastic. Let's keep the conversation going with you, Farideh.
Bush or Obama, as far as the candidates are concerned, let me just say a little bit about what I see the differences between Bush and Obama in terms of, historical context. I mean, remember when Bush came into presidency after 9/11, there was an opportune moment in terms of Iran-U.S. relations, in terms of, United States invaded Afghanistan. There were clear cooperation between the two countries, not only politically, but in military terms. Some of the people who later on engaged in negotiations over the nuclear issue later on with the United States during the Obama administration were actively engaged in discussions with members of the Bush administration until effectively the axis of evil speech that pushed the United States in a different direction, and then the Bush administration essentially took an absolutist position, zero enrichment, all the way through almost until 2005, and slowly came to the realization that that was not a position that was going to work out. It began to show some flexibility in terms of what is possible on the nuclear issue, but really did not develop any kind of political will to resolve this issue. With Obama, we enter a completely different territory. Obviously, he begins by extending his hands, whatever, whether it was iron or velvet, whatever was perceived. But the situation becomes complicated because of events inside Iran. But because of the political will to resolve this nuclear issue, given Obama's commitment beyond the relationship to Iran to non-proliferation, you see a concerted effort to resolve this issue, of course, combined with the ability that he had to create a consensus against Iran on the sanctions regime. So if, I see in the case of Bush an 8 years of essentially up and down political confusion, recalcitrance, and then confusion. In the case of Obama, you see eventually by the end clarity and political determination to resolve this issue. What I'm afraid of, of course, in the case of Trump, I don't even know what to be afraid of, just be afraid. But in the case of Clinton, what I'm afraid of is essentially yet another series of political confusion about exactly the kind of threat that Iran constitutes, what kind of relationship United States wants, what kind of role United States, Iran should have in the region, and in the process, given the contentious dynamics that exist in both countries, both in United States in terms of relationship to Iran, and then in Iran in relationship to United States, confusion is not good. Confusion leads essentially, ultimately, to conflict. If, particularly in the case of the nuclear agreement, there is no resolution on the part of the US administration to defend this deal and defend it in a very public manner, the way Obama has done, threatening vetoes and so on, you know, domestic political dynamics in the United States are such that that dynamic becomes a threat to the agreement. And of course, that reverberates inside Iran as well. And remember that in Iran, you know, as soon as American elections are over, election cycle in Iran begins. And that is, you know, despite the fact that I'm pretty confident that Rouhani is going to win, nevertheless, it's going to be a highly contentious political environment, tremendous. And, you know, again, the nuclear agreement will be at the center of political discussions.
Fantastic.
I felt the same thing, but you got to say something.
Well, okay. So first of all, I think if Trump wins, chances are we're all going to be in Guantanamo together. So 5-star accommodation, NIAC conference there. So that's going to be an interesting experience. Now, I wanted to maybe put this in a more regional context.
Sure.
But first of all, to look again, taking a historic perspective on the U.S.-Iran back and forthing over the last 30 years. If you look at the history from the 1980s to 2003, you know, the Axis is evil speech, and then now, one of the things that you see is there have been various attempts on the Iranian side to sort of try and make some kind of, you know, opening with the US, and their experience of it has been that every time they've helped, at some point the US has reneged. And you know, Axis of Evil is one of them, but it actually goes back to the 1980s if you look in terms of what was going on with the hostages in Lebanon. And to me, one of the big questions now is that, okay, you have the Iran deal. From the Iranian side, they're living up to their part of the problem. On the US side, we haven't. And the financial sanctions, and we can talk about what's structural and what's the part of Congress and whose fault it is, but it doesn't matter. When you're outside of the boundary of the United States, and you say the United States made a deal with Iran, then the US has to live up to its side of the deal. And I really worry about what impression we end up giving if it is perceived that the US does not hold to its promise. This is not only for Iran, which I think is really bad news. I mean, not just bad news in terms of the economics and things like that in Iran, but I mean in terms of just the political perceptions and the future of any ongoing conversation if people feel as if the US is reneging or keeping this limited. But also across the region. You know, the US is not a particularly popular country in the Middle East for all sorts of reasons. But people want to see that if you can sit at the table and make a deal, that the deal will you know, be held up. And so, it really is the reputation of the country, I think, which is really important, and it's important I mean, it's critical that that aspect of the message is conveyed to whoever wins. And as you said, as far as I can see, you know, a Clinton administration is not necessarily going to be an easy administration for us to be engaging with on Iran. The tone has improved, and I think it has improved in large part thanks to NIAC members and Iranians generally, who have, every time we've heard something negative or particularly nasty, people have responded. But overall, the question of who are the advisors, what's the perception there, et cetera, I think that's important. And then again, putting it into this other sort of wider regional context, the notion of thinking of Iran and Saudi as kind of equal weight, equal problem, but then Saudi being, you know, the ally and Iran being the bad guy. I mean, this 30-year narrative that we've had, when you look at the problems that we're seeing, the extremism that's been spreading everywhere, which is, and I think I've said this before last year as well, it's the Wahhabi, Salafi, ideology that's spreading. You can't equate that influence with Iran, which is Shia. The Shia population of the world is 15% of all Muslims, and the vast majority sit in Iran. And the idea of sectarianism between Shias and Sunnis being equally being of balance is actually false. It's a narrative that you get from the Saudis, and it is a totally false narrative. And in fact, the sectarianism, which has really been devastating not only the Muslim communities around the world, but also infiltrating in the US, is the Wahhabi Salafi sectarianism, which comes from very thin slice of, as we know, Saudi Arabia and the Arab Gulf states. And I really wonder whether the Clinton administration is willing to grab this bull by the horn and actually acknowledge it. Because with friends like that, we really, really don't need more, many enemies. I mean, that's the essence of where we need to go. And it's beyond the blame game. As far as it's no longer a question of saying this one's good and that one's bad, or, what are we? We're sons of Magi, and they're, whatever Khamenei called them, puny Satans. That kind of stuff is absolute nonsense. What's happening now is people are dying. Bombs are being dropped. The Syria problem is still going on. The Yemen, where for some reason, Bush, Obama, if you're a Yemeni, really it doesn't make a difference. We're dropping bombs on the heads of Yemenis for no apparent reason. This kind of stuff, this has to stop. We can't just pretend as if we're not involved. We're involved, and unless we want that region to explode and continue to, affect Europe and everywhere else, I think the time has come to just really look at where we want to be as opposed to where we have been.
Well, this is actually a good opportunity. Some of your comments segued, Sanam, into what my next question is. And so why don't we start with you and work our way down the line is, let's talk a little bit about why aren't we further along? I think a lot of people, mostly outside of DC, but a lot of people thought that, we were going to get this deal and then we were going to become friends. We were going to become allies. And I don't think that was ever the hard sell that anybody in Tehran or Washington was making. But understanding that that's not the case, I think it's important to flesh out for everybody here in the room today, why haven't US-Iran relations improved more since the deal? What are the obstacles? Is it the sanctions? Is it Iran's hardliners? Is it something else? You touched upon some of the regional dynamics, but flesh out a little bit more what you think will work our way down the line and end with Suzanne.
So, more general, and then I'll be specific. So one of the things that we know is, sadly, peace agreements, that we haven't had one peace agreement, and I really think of Iran-US as a form of a peace agreement, right? We haven't had one peace agreement in recent history that has been implemented fully. So whether you look at Colombia, whether you look at various parts of the world where they've had peace deals. So, and why is that? Well, what happens is that you get the negotiations, they come into, let's say, the middle ground, there's a compromise between different parties. If you've had a more inclusive process, as we did with the Iran deal, where you had civil society really involved in both informing the public and pushing for the deal to go through in terms of what was happening at Congress, that helps it become more sustainable. But we also know that the day after a deal is signed, you get the spoilers from every side coming straight at you. And that's, that can be in Iran, that can be in the US, that can be in Saudi Arabia, that can be in Israel. It's everywhere. And so there are plenty of people who don't want this to work because they are part of the folks and the sector that has benefited from these sanctions. They're part of the people that fear change. They're part of the, they may be ideological, economic, etc. So they've always been there. We always knew that they were going to be there, and they're probably going to come out bigger, more, and we're going to probably hear that roar even more loudly as time goes on. But and that's where I, again, if it's a question of saying, what should the next administration do? It's, don't be swayed by those voices, because look at where that trajectory took us. Look at where sanctions took us for 15 years. It got us nowhere. Look at where war has taken us for all these years. It's taken us nowhere. We need a different approach. And this is not the United States. I mean, right now the United States in the last 15 years has been at war perpetually. And really, again, the question for us as our generation and passing on to our kids is this what we want it to be for the next 15 years? The Iran deal is really an opening to say, no, things can be done differently. And frankly, making a deal or peace and love don't have to go together. You can be in a peace and still not like each other. The Swiss don't like each other very much, but they've been living together for 500 years because they get it, that it's beneficial to everybody. So I think that that's kind of, we have to recognize that you have people who don't want the deal, but what's their vision? Where are they taking us versus where is it that this deal is taking us?
Absolutely. The spoilers in both capitals. There's no doubt about that.
And many other capitals.
And many other capitals as well. And that's fair to point out. Unpopular to point out, but fair to, and intellectually honest to point out. Farideh, what do you think?
Well, obviously, spoilers in both places, but I think it's also important to understand that almost 40 years of hostility has become institutionalized. So when we are talking about spoilers, we are not simply talking about, hardliners, softliners. We are talking about institutions that have been created to sustain that hostility. And that institutional interest are the most difficult one to address as we go. And within the context of United States, that institutional hostility obviously shows itself in the Treasury Department. I cannot, that's the reality. People had jobs, over a good period of time, gained jobs just to, impose sanctions on Iran and write booklets and details, and it's became bigger and bigger and bigger. You can say exactly the same thing. I can name institutions inside Iran, but we are talking about United States. And at this particular moment, you say that expectations were high in terms of the agreement. True, but Zarif or Rouhani did not sell the agreement as something that is going to get rid of all the sanctions. There might have been some perceptions, but they clearly stated that these were nuclear sanctions that will be lifted. Well, you have an extremely challenging environment in the United States. As was pointed out, you have a series of sanctions that are being lifted exactly at the same time, another set of sanctions that are being enforced, perhaps even more diligently, because you have that kind of institutional insight. That challenging environment has proven extremely difficult in the process of lifting of sanctions. It took 8 months. I know they say, that's routine, but it took a very long time to lift the Boeing sanctions. That created all sorts of mistrust attitude. Obviously, the banking sanctions, it's not only that the banks, big banks are hesitant. It's because of the rules. It's because they got punished. $7 billion worth of, Paribas, HSBC. It's not, they are freaked out. It's not because their, profit margin is little in Iran. It's that their cost margin is maybe extremely, extremely high, and nobody is giving them confidence. I think in the foreign relations talk that Zarif gave, he said that Secretary Kerry goes and says, go ahead and do it, and then the Treasury folks come in and give them 15 pages of hazards if you go ahead and do it. So that kind of dynamic has proven extremely challenging and has created all sorts of mistrust on the other side. And, let's not underestimate the opposition on the other side that has a vested interest of constantly saying that we got nothing. So you have a very, very difficult dynamic that makes it, has given the opportunity to the opponents of improved relations with the United States to say that, okay, we did this, it's good for us at this particular moment, but the United States remains untrustworthy, and therefore we will not expand that. combined with that is the reality of American elections and the fact that nobody knows what's going to happen in 2 months. And what the new administration, of whichever kind, the kind of commitment that they are willing to give to this one particular agreement that has been so detailed in order to make sure that nobody can renege, but we're still at a moment where we are not sure about the commitments on every side. So I think that has been a major reason for, for the past year in terms of lack of expansion. Whether that dynamic will continue after the American election and after the Iranian election, I happen to think that after the Iranian election, assuming the people that we hope or expect get elected, that there actually will be a good period, a 2-year period, about 2 years, 18 months probably, that the United States is not going to enter an election cycle, hopefully, and the Iranian system is not going to be in an election cycle. And I would see that as a good opportune moment for thinking in terms of both sides thinking about extending. Whether it's going to happen or not, it depends. It takes 2 to 10.
Absolutely. Suzanne?
Well, I think a lot has been said, but I think it's important for us just to remind ourselves, because I think we've all lived it and witnessed it over the last 35 years before the negotiations on the nuclear deal began. That road is littered with failed attempts at U.S.-Iran official engagement. When one side was ready to engage, the other side wasn't, for whatever reason. So we finally got to the point with President Obama where he made a strategic decision to engage Iran, it happened to coincide with a strategic decision on Iran's part and the leadership of Iran to resolve its nuclear issue. I think we also need to really give some credit to the negotiators on both sides. I mean, they went...
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And, they went into the negotiations really with a pragmatic point of view, and I would say a principled point of view. And they decided early on, in fact, I had this conversation with Foreign Minister Zarif just yesterday. They decided early on to focus on the nuclear issue, not focus on the grand bargain of years gone by and all the other issues and tying them all together. They knew the nuclear issue in and of itself would be difficult, almost impossible. But I think focusing just that made it at least a more viable way to move forward. And it wasn't meant to be transformational. Obama's engagement policy with Iran is not the same as the engagement policy he pursued with Burma. That has been transformational, and now our official relations are restored after over 2 decades of non-relations. In the case of Cuba, the same. Our official relationship is restored. In the case of Iran, that was never on the table. And I don't think either side came to the table saying that this is a goal of this negotiation. And in fact, my own personal view is I don't see that happening, particularly while Khamenei is Supreme Leader of Iran. I think the mistrust is so deep, so great, the psychological baggage is so vast that it's really hard to imagine him as Supreme Leader ever agreeing to restore official relations with Iran. So we may have to wait till the next guy. But I do think in the case of the United States and the next administration, the biggest determining factor of whether or not they will abide by the deal, support the deal, threaten vetoes in support of the deal, is as long as the Iranians are complying with it. And so far, we have a very good track record, not only of the comprehensive plan of action, but even the interim deal. So we have now 3 solid years, more or less, of Iranian compliance with these deals. You know, that's a pretty good record to grow from. And as long as that compliance continues, I think even a President Trump would be very hard-pressed to make a rational case for reneging on the deal, although anything is possible, especially with him. I wouldn't put it past him. But let's say Secretary Clinton does become president. Think about her inbox on day one, the number of crises around the world that she'll be facing, let alone the divisiveness that has come to the fore in this country that she is going to have to face if she wins. Reuniting us as a country after a very shattering election campaign. If the Iran nuclear deal is working, I don't see her wanting to tinker with that. I mean, why would she? It's a little oasis in a sea of turmoil. So I think cooler heads will prevail there. What I'm a little worried about with Secretary Clinton becoming president is she going to have the vision to build on that? To take what Zarif said yesterday is when he and Rouhani look at the nuclear deal, they thought of it as a foundation to build on, but it's, they're afraid that it's turning into a ceiling. And I do think that given politics in both countries, the opposition groups, our Congress, it's really going to take a bold vision to try to turn it around, turn the deal into something that is transformative that transforms the U.S.-Iran relationship. I'm not quite sure Secretary Clinton has that vision, but I think groups like NIAC, that's why you're here, to really push that, and let's be imaginative. And even if we pursue it simply from the point of U.S. interest, let alone Iranian national interest, it is in our interest as when we see the turmoil around the region to have a stable relationship with Iran. Are there other diplomatic agreements we can build from the nuclear agreement? I think there are, and I'm hoping that that's the direction that they take, and groups like NIAC can help forge it in that way. I also think that when we look ahead to the coming 10 years in this relationship, we have to be, honest. There are big gulfs and profound differences between our governments, not so much our societies, that's a bright spot. But also, I would think for the next president, one of the main things they should be thinking about and judging this deal by is how it is improving the lives of the Iranian people, their day-to-day lives. I think that's something as Americans we should be concerned with, and that's something that this deal should help deliver. And I'm hoping maybe with the next administration, OFAC would change. I hope our friends from OFAC aren't still here, but clear house a little bit. We'll have a new Treasury Secretary, I would think, a new approach to these things. It's hard. Once an institution is working so single-mindedly on one goal, and let's face it, these past 8 years, it's been to sanction Iran. It's really hard to stop that train, and turn it around. And I think that's part of that's institutional culture. It doesn't move quickly, we know that. So this is going to take some time before things get really going. And I do think that hopefully our next president will have the vision, have the leadership to think more imaginatively about how this relationship, I don't want to give pie in the sky. We're not going to become allies anytime in the near future. But can we at least just think of how to make the relationship less contentious so that we can then work with Iran on those areas where we have common interests. I mean, the most compelling common interest we have today is fighting ISIS. And I think that should be a priority, and also starting U.S.-Iran regional dialogue on the region and the many fires that are happening there. That to me is a no-brainer, and I hope we get there.
You said so many things there that, that I could use as the hook or the segue into what my next question is going to be, but I really liked the term that you used, imaginative, because I think that very accurately describes or encapsulates what President Obama has accomplished over the duration of his presidency. I want to take that idea of being imaginative and come to you, Sanam, and then work our way back down to you, Suzanne, and ask, if we're being imaginative, if you had the opportunity to be imaginative with the next president of the United States, 30 minutes to give he or she 3 ideas on what to do with regards to U.S.-Iran relations or America's Iran policy going forward, what would you tell Mr. or Madam President?
Can I have a preface just as a follow-on from the previous conversation
you may.
before I go? When we think about psychological baggage, it's not just in Iran. Okay, there is huge psychological baggage in this country.
Absolutely.
And I think it goes back to the hostage crisis.
It absolutely does.
And Americans tend to want to say Iranians are irrational and emotional, and you know, I think actually that's probably the problem here. That it's the Americans, the American administration, and the folks that have been in these, that there is an irrationality about that issue that hasn't really been put on the table, and I think that that's something we have to acknowledge. It was traumatic, and let's just say that we as a country were traumatized by it, even though it's hard for the big empire to admit that it was traumatized by a smaller country, let's say. So this is the irrationality. I think that's just something that is important to put on the table. Now, what would I say to the next president? Actually, President Clinton has a quote that he once said, whatever is wrong in America can be fixed with what's right in America. And I think if you apply that same lens and that same philosophy to the US foreign policy, you have huge scope for changing the way we are in the world, right? And I'll give you an example. As I said before, the last 15 years, the United States has been at perpetual war, especially in our region. Okay, we can't deny that. I mean, it is absolutely abominable that this has been what we've been doing. Now, turn it around and think about, and meanwhile at home, by the way, we've had all sorts of problems because the money that goes into the military means it's money that's not going into our schools, into our universities, into our roads, into healthcare, all the other issues that matter to people, right? Now, imagine if we could turn this around and say, okay, what are the great things that the US has that it's done at home and that it used to do abroad, right? We used to have great public universities in this country. We have the whole question of the national parks. You know, the question of Medicare, that is actually really, really good for, you know, if you're, the right age, you get really good medical care. Anything, you know, questions around the technology the innovation, the pluralism, with all the problems that this country has right now in Charlotte and all these places, compared to Europe, the US is extraordinary in terms of its ability to welcome and embrace people up to now, even with all the stuff that Trump says. It has this history behind it. These are the values that we should be going out into the world with. We used to be that. If you take my father's generation, their memory of the United States was a country that, you know, provided free libraries and opened their universities and brought health care to Iran and brought schools to Iran. And that is what made people want to come to the US and believe in the US versus what, again, across our region and across our world, we had as the colonial powers of Europe. And yet all of that has been, the US itself has destroyed all of that goodwill. 9/11, the world was with the United States. Iran, people were lighting candles, right? There is tremendous goodwill, and still what comes, people aren't watching Russian soap operas, they're watching American soap operas, right? It's the music and I mean, there's a lot of stuff that this country has which the rest of the world in that region still wants. And yet we've forgotten that. And what we do, we keep kind of sort of, as we say in Farsi, it's a tofis arbala, we keep sort of spitting upwards in our own face because we say things like, you know, human rights are our values, they're not your values. Well, we all know human rights, you know, the Cyrus cylinder starts with us back in 2,500 years. But when you have Egyptians dying on the streets of Cairo because they want freedom and democracy, or they want some capacity to breathe and have a decent life, and for them, the United States has been a country that has just supported a military dictatorship and continues to do that, you know, it's really offensive. So I think that and as I said, it's been 35 years of things, and it's been exponentially getting worse. I don't think we can wait around another 10 years. Things are getting worse and worse. And this is the moment to recalibrate and imagine what is the future of the world that we want. And this trajectory that we have right now is not a particularly happy trajectory for our children. So I think it's really, as I said, going back, you know, go into the world with whatever has been right in America, because that has so much to do with everybody else's basic needs, what we call soft power needs, but it's actually human security issues. And I think it would open a lot of scope for us to be improving the world.
There's no question. America has interests and America has values. And it's oftentimes much more clear when America is in pursuit of its interests. But we should also talk about, acknowledge the importance of the pursuit of our values. But I think it's very important for us to walk and chew gum at the same time.
But
one can't come at the expense of the other.
But if your interests are not supporting your values, then at some point they're not your interests.
And therein lies the problem, because look, everybody wants to have their cake and eat it too. But 9 out of 10 times when you live in the real world, you're forced to choose. And when we are forced to choose, and this is the personal criticism that I have, is we oftentimes choose our interests when they conflict with our values at the expense of our values, instead of trying to reimagine how can we mesh the two together to not only make the United States better off in the long run, but also the rest of the world.
But I also think that's the difference between being, you know, those people who are trained in IR, international relations, versus those who are trained in conflict resolution or anthropology or other things. I mean, you know, this or that. No, it's most people are constantly balancing their lives, values and interests going together, and we find compromise. And I don't think it's that hard to find it in the world out there. But then if the mentality is it's either this or that, or you know, you get only the interest, the guys who have a profit interest at the table, then they are doing more damage to us collectively than anything else. So I think
I like that. I agree. Yeah. I like that, and I think that's a great thing to tell the next president. So let's take that.
I'm sure I'll have the spot time. Yeah.
Let's tell the next president about exactly that. But then, what else should we tell the next president, Farideh?
You know, I'm a political scientist, and that means by definition I'm not imaginative.
That's very honest of you.
You know, you mentioned it. You know, the distinction between, you know, those who are trying to resolve conflicts and IR. And as you were talking, and I was thinking I'm going to begin with that. So you also referred to it. So I'm going to be a little bit more specific than that. You know, if I have my half an hour with the next president, first of all, we have already talked about the most important, that, you know, grab this deal. You know, you have to be serious about this deal, and do treat it as a foundation, and not as a ceiling. For one basic reason, which is an amazing reason, if we take a look at the history of US-Iran relation. I was involved in some of the track 2 stuff that Suzanne organized. And I remember the lowest level US State Department folks that would come into the meeting, the Iranians had to leave. Because the State Department, I'm talking about, you know, 25-year-olds coming into the meeting because they were not allowed to be in the same room as Iranian officials. And this, I'm not talking about past century, I'm not talking about 1950s, I'm talking about 21st century. So the most important component of this deal is actual direct contact between US officials and Iranian officials, which is amazing. I really did not imagine this 5 years ago. I did not really think that they could be emailed, on a daily basis, at the Secretary of State level. So, and I'm not going to even talk about Rouhani talking to Obama. So to me, that is a foundation that needs to be maintained. And there is a procedural problem with it, and there is a larger problem with it. The procedural problem, maybe that's not the right word to use, but part of the reason that has been possible, it was because Zarif and Kerry had a previous relationship. They have been able to maintain that relationship. The question is whether the next person that comes into the United States in that position, some of the names that are being mentioned obviously can do the same thing, but that's an important component of what has happened, and therefore it has to be sustained. So not only there has to be some sort of a public commitment to the agreement, but the process itself that is going to go on for the next 10 years, because there's going to be all sorts of kinks that has to be worked out, has to be used as a way to sustain that relationship, precisely because if a crisis arises, those kind of personal relationships can step in. I also would like to see, obviously a process that is organized and is headed by Ambassador Mall that does that, but I do think it would be a very good idea to have some, to identify some sort of a person that becomes the lead person in terms of sustaining that relationship. I do like the State Department to maintain the leadership in this process of constant interaction. It's an interagency process where you have to talk to Treasury, to Commerce, to AG's office, and the State Department is heading that process. And I do think that that is something that needs to be sustained. And then ultimately, and this was something that became very clear to me as series of conversations that have occurred with today's officials, Obama administration officials, that possibly will also be officials in the Clinton administration, that the mindset about Iran and Iran's strategic role in the region really has not changed. And part of that, therefore it requires some sort of a renewed effort to think about Iran and whether or not this nuclear agreement, we had, when was the last NIE about Iran, 2003?
National intelligence estimate.
Yeah, national, where you actually go and try to see, to assess, what are Iran's objectives, motivations, we still constantly talk about Iran, despite Iran wants to be a hegemon, Iran is a troublemaker, Iran effectively doesn't have any interest, shouldn't have any kind of defense interest, If Iran is in Iraq, it's because Iran is a troublemaker, not because Iraq is next door if it falls apart, and ISIS is there, it's a real danger for Iran. So you really do need to, go and take a look at the dynamics that are involved in the region and come up with a new assessment. Do you want to keep the old framework that constantly talks, okay, we dealt with the nuclear issue by sanctioning Iran, convincing Iran to become more flexible, but we also became more flexible on our side. If we had not changed our position, there wouldn't have been any agreement. There was totally crippling sanctions. But on other issues that are, when we talk about terrorism in Iran, Iran and terrorist organizations, so our position is still absolutist. We are right. Iran is completely the troublemaker, and we are going to reduce sanctions if they start behaving You know, again, is the same framework as the old nuclear deal, that you start changing and then I'll think about. You stop your enrichment and then I'll start thinking about. And I think one has to start, you know, for me, imaginative is that way. Okay, has anything changed? You know, we went through a process that showed that Iranians can be flexible. They can be great negotiators too, you know, and they managed a pretty amazing feat, you know. I mean, who would have thought that the Iranians would be able to sit in front of 6 great powers and bring 6 foreign ministers to one? I mean, to me, it's just out of my imagination 5 years ago. But they did that. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Does it, I mean, doesn't that change your perception of Iran as, instead of thinking of it as a completely rogue state? I mean, you didn't treat it as a rogue state, you treated it as a status quo state in the region, accepting its power, and then you cannot go back and again talk about Iran in the same way you talked about Iran in the pre-nuclear era. So, pre-nuclear deal era. So for me, imagination essentially is more in terms of the concrete changes in policy outlook. You know, a framing of Iran that it's truly required in Washington because, you know, the constant reference to Iran engaging in certain act as though nothing has changed is extremely problematic to me. Look at it. The nuclear deal has agreed and has been made, and then we are saying it didn't go far enough. Why didn't it go far enough? Because Iran continues to be nasty. It continues to be naughty in Iraq. It continues to be in Syria. Its human record is bad, and therefore, you know, we cannot do anything else in relationship to Iran. That kind of language is pre-nuclear agreement deal. You know, you cannot continue that kind of language and not sound hypocritical in a region where other players are engaged in much bigger human rights violation and much nastier destabilizing activities in the region.
Now you see why we invite her to come you asked me why I invite you to come every year. That's why we invite you to come every year. Suzanne, please round us off, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience.
I'm going to be very specific in what I would say to the next president. I think there are some very specific policy recommendations. I'm also trained as a political scientist, by the way, so this will be semi-imaginative, I guess. I think, you know, when we look at this deal, it is extraordinary. There's no question about it. A lot of it had to do with chemistry, again, between the negotiators and Bill Burns before Secretary Kerry did a lot of the heavy lifting. And I think one of the things I would emphasize to the next president is the need to institutionalize the contact between our country, make it broader, make it deeper. We just can't rely on 1 or 2 people to carry this water going forward. I would immediately want to see you know, regular dialogue between our Secretary of the Treasury and his staff with the governor of Iran's central bank.
Absolutely.
I think that is absolutely key to ensuring that the JCPOA moves forward. Certainly the implementation teams of the deals, that's become well-honed, and that needs to continue and grow as well. I would also like to see diplomatic engagement on a range of issues, not just the nuclear deal, but others to the extent possible. And I understand this will be difficult primarily because the leader has said until we see great benefit that we expect from the JCPOA, we can only discuss nuclear. But I would constantly push that envelope and find ways to do that. When I look at what's happening in the Persian Gulf and the heightened tensions there between our navies, that worries me quite a bit. You can see how that could become, can escalate and turn into a spiraling crisis that could get beyond control. So there's an area where I think we should be pursuing direct discussions with Iran on forging some sort of incidents at sea agreement, some sort of protocol of communication between our navies. We had a similar agreement with the Soviets during the Cold War. I think it's clear that we need one between the United States and Iran, and I would press very hard for that. In fact, I think the State Department had years ago worked on this issue, so there's probably one already written that could just be taken out of mothballs and signed. I would make that a priority. The next president, I would say, absolutely has to really be as creative as President Obama was when it came to engaging the Iranians on the nuclear deal. The next president has to do the same thing on the many regional crises. A regional dialogue with Iran, a serious regional dialogue. And you know, that could be through letters directly to the leader, through secret channel that could maybe evolve over time, the way we did it with the nuclear issue. But that is a pressing priority, and I don't need to take you on a tour of the region to talk about the many issues. I would even extend it to Afghanistan as well, where it's in both of our interests to stabilize that government to the best that we can. Then beyond these issues, there's a whole basket of things. I would have a very long list in the area of people-to-people diplomacy. For example, thinking through the establishment of a U.S. interest section in Iran, whereby Iranians wouldn't have to go to another country to get a visa to come here. They could be issued a visa right in their own country. I would love to see more educational exchanges between our countries, exchanges between artists, between scientists as well as athletes. I think the sky's the limit there. Of course, this will have to be handled very delicately because many in Iran will see this as an attempt on the U.S. part to infiltrate the country and plant spies. But I think we could start making this part of our discussions with Iran, how to improve those people-to-people ties. And I think if we're consistent about it and have some clear ideas and most importantly are ready to reciprocate, I think reciprocity is so important as we build this relationship forward that it isn't one-sided, and if we're sincere about that, we can move forward. So those are some very specific ideas. There are many, many others that I can think of, but
Absolutely.
I'll stop there.
No, that's great, and I think that's a perfect segue into opening it up to the larger group so we can ask some questions. I would ask Yas to give me one of these when it's time to move on. And where are the folks with the microphone? I see you. Raise your hands, raise your hands. Okay, good. Let's start with, I can't see some. Oh, I see you right in front of me. We'll start with the one right in front of me. Make it nice and easy. Right here. Right here. You got it. Okay. Thanks.
Is this on? Can you hear me? My question is, I guess since I personally and probably most of us here can't see us out lobbying the interests that are against this deal or making this deal succeed and move forward and progress, if lobbying, let's say a Clinton administration is out of the question, how else can we interest her administration in kind of moving forward on the deal and making sure it doesn't fall apart, making sure it does stay a foundation and not a ceiling? Because I don't, you know, some of the arguments are, well, Iranian American community can, you know, build relationships with her administration the way we have with Obama's and lobby against, let's say, the Israelis or the Saudis. But I don't think we're going to be able to out-lobby those organizations. So in what other way, I guess, can we dangle, you know, like some sort of interest with that administration to make the deal appealing to her?
So the way
I guess maybe the question might be...
Absolutely. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to say very quickly, the way that we'll do this is whoever wants to jump in and answer a question, even if it's all three of you, please feel free. It's not limited to any one particular person. Is there anything else that you wanted to add on?
No.
Okay. Who wants to jump in first? Anyone?
Well, I think to convey your ideas and thoughts to our government, you don't necessarily have to be a lobbyist to do so. I think working with your local officials to relay your feelings and thoughts about this, working in groups is important, and then hopefully that trickles up. But I do think that in this case of making sure the next president is really committed to this Iran deal, it's very important for the Iranian American community to have its voice heard in any way, in shape or form. It could be through op-eds. It could be through working with your local officials, as I said. Also, I don't know, all the things lobbyists do, but maybe on a more local level. I think the important thing is, a consistency in the message that Iran is living up to its end of the deal, and that will hopefully continue to be verified by the IAEA. We need to live up to our side of the deal, and one of the ways to do that is to ensure that people of Iran are getting benefits that they were promised from this deal. When I meet with politicians and officials, and I really want to piss them off, the thing that I say that I find that works well is, you're reneging on what we agreed to do, or you're not following through on what we as a country agreed to do. And, as Americans, that's un-American, isn't it? I mean, it's really not following through on what you agreed to do is un-American to me. So that seems to resonate. Finding messages that will resonate, I think, is important. But, this is, even if we do have a president that is open to these ideas and willing to carry the water, it's still going to be a struggle for all the reasons that were brought up. Our Congress, other interest groups that are better funded and more equipped to deal with this and have been doing it for a long time. But that shouldn't stop us. I mean, I think the point is, if it hasn't been said clearly, this deal is working. It is working in every sense of the word, and we need to live up to our end of the bargain.
Can I just to add, I think a few things. One is, it would be interesting to try and figure out who the advisors are, because you would think that on the Middle East team or whoever comes into the State Department, or if, as we say, there's in the same way that you have an institutional structure that is OFAC that is just churning out sanctions, if you could have another institutional body which is meant to be really and head up by a senior envoy, whether it's one of the folks that's already been in the system or not, but to look at it and say, do we have any Iranian Americans in there? Why do we have other hyphenated Americans, for want of a better word, advising on this region or in relation to, do we have any American Iranians in there, or do we have anybody from our community that has access, and having not only the sort of the access to the government, but as Suzanne was saying, the lobbying or the advocacy that works best is when it is rooted in the constituency of the representatives in Congress, right? If they get 10 or 15 or 50 calls from Iranian Americans saying, hey, this matters to us, it matters in a way, the impact is greater than whatever we can do in Washington, especially for those of us who live in Washington and don't even have a voting representative up there, right? It matters that it's coming from home. So that part of it is important. The other part, I think, and it does put the onus on us as a community, but the other part of this is to say this deal potentially has a huge economic benefit for small and mid-sized American companies, right? Boeing gets what it wants because it's huge, right? And you have Airbus on the other side. But there are a lot of European companies that are getting ready. They want to go into the Iranian markets. And why should why shouldn't your average American-owned, American manufacturing company in this country that's hiring Americans have access to that? And I don't think that we've done a good enough job of selling it to those folks because they don't understand that this is actually jobs here, right? So it's thinking about it in those ways and beginning to access the local businesses that might be and bringing them on board about what this deal is, dealing with all the, just all the negativity that's been around. I mean, we are dealing with a lot of negative perceptions and changing the narrative, I think, in that regard is also really important. And finally, yeah, this question of the folks that are against this, what are they suggesting? Do they, let's take it to the end degree of what it is that they want. That they want sanctions, they want to crumble Iran's economy, they want people to be suffering, they want, then what? They want an uprising, and then what? They want Iran to fall apart and have the Pakistan nuclear weapons having direct access across to the Persian Gulf. I mean, thinking about what it is that they are, what their vision is, and what it is that they want, when you take it to that level, it's not good for the US, it's not good for Europe, it's not good for Iran, it's not good for anybody, right? I don't even think it's good for them. It's just that they're kind of in this narrow world. So let's challenge that. Where are you taking us with this? Because at the moment, it's as if we have to defend, this crazy vision, but our vision is actually very pragmatic, right? And yet, it hasn't had its fair share of airing, if you want. So I think the more we have the public from the ground up talking about these things, doing, whether it's in universities or other places, just unpacking, an ABC to the Iran deal and why it's important for the Clinton administration or the Trump administration, whatever it is, to deal with it. I think those kind of bringing it down to the public level and saying what it means to them in their lives potentially could be a way of thinking.
If I could add one quick thing to that before we go to the next question. I can speak from personal experience. I remember having conversations in 2006, 2007 when I was working in the State Department, saying the exact same things almost verbatim that I say today about what's possible in transforming US-Iran relationships, not just on the nuclear deal, but other stuff as well. And people told me that I was crazy. People told me I was naive. People told me I was going native. Now I have some of those same people coming back to me and telling me that I was right. So that's possible.
Can I say something? I'm sorry. My name is and my husband was an ambassador too. I'm in a unique position. My name is Lynn Katabchi, and my husband was an ambassador to the University of Tehran's diabetes program. And he was an Iranian and went to America at 17 years old and became a doctor, a professor, a researcher, and he was the principal investigator on all 5 diabetes studies in the past 50 years. So my husband contacted the university, and I don't know exactly how this happened, about 12 years ago, and he did their international symposium inviting France and everybody to Iran. And if my husband could do this, other Iranians could do this as well. He was a scientist and a brilliant man, and he was on Iranian television, for probably about 12 years teaching about diabetes. And I just wanted to say that anyone can do what Dr. Katabchi did. And if you want to Google him, he's really very interesting to read about, and he's probably one of the finest Iranian doctors that ever was. Not that I'm too proud of him.
I think we have time for one more question.
Can I just say something organizational?
Of course you can, please.
I think we have an example to build on, which was the kind of coalition building and working with other groups that were interested on this issue, but for different reasons than us. Non-proliferation community, anti-war community. We got together and created. Exactly, and I think that's an organizational example, and it had an impact on the American election. There was a candidate that actually dared to go public in a debate and say, we should improve our relations with Iran, we should have our, that was not, it was just something that candidates were afraid to even articulate in public, but it was made possible because of that kind of linkages that were made. So we have an example that worked. Obviously, sustaining it and broadening it is, it's hard, but it's not that there is not an opening and we haven't seen it, you know, we haven't seen the light at the end of the tunnel. So.
Absolutely. So I think we have time for one more. Did somebody already have the microphone? Yeah, okay.
My name is Tanir Vakili. I'm coming from the Bay Area. I was recently in Iran, and I was questioned in the airport. My question is for the lady with the red coat. I wonder why you think the next political leader in Iran will give a permission and make things better. The problem that we have, Iran is just the island which brokers make so much money out of it. We have mafias in healthcare, we have mafias in car industry, we have mafias everywhere. It's a heaven for them.
What did he say?
So I wonder, why do you think the next president or the next political leader who is going to replace with Khamenei is going to be the better one? Right now there are two nominations for that position, and both of them are anti-Sunnis. I'm Sunni, by the way. And there are 20 million Iranians who are Sunnis. And I have a fear for them. So I guess this is the time for US to take action. Khamenei itself cannot take any action. This is for us to stand up for Iranians, especially the youth generation like me, who need jobs, who need some sort of a dependence for their future. And if we cannot give them to them, and forget about any peace agreement 20 years from today or 10 years from today, this is the time before Khamenei take off from this world. Because right now there are two political groups in Iran. There are one who wants to try to take to Iran and connect them to the rest of the international world. And there are groups. My question is, why do you think the next political leader would allow a relationship with the US? What's your hope? I mean, like...
Well, can I answer your question? I don't think you were listening to me. I never said that I thought the next supreme leader of Iran would change and move forward with reestablishing diplomatic relations with Iran. If you were listening, I said, who knows? I think those were my exact words. What I did say was, I think the current leader, Ali Khamenei, I'm very skeptical that such a reestablishment of our diplomatic relations would happen under his tenure for various reasons. But at this stage, we don't know what the next supreme leader, how he'll act on these issues or what he'll think. So I really don't know.
And I would add that nobody knows. Trying to predict Iranian politics can be a very humbling experience. So it's very easy to list off the variety of very real challenges, political, economic, and social, that exist inside of Iran. It's much more difficult to promote sound, non-violent, peaceful, which is what the majority of people inside of Iran prefer, solutions to all of these challenges that can be durable. And I would add my personal opinion. I'm taking the prerogative of being the moderator, so I get to say the last thing. If anybody expects that that can come from the outside, I offer you Iraq, I offer you Afghanistan, and I say have a nice day. Give it up for your panel, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.